Welcome to the Beza Performance live stream. My name is Marshall Henley. I'm the president of Beza Performance, and I forgot to turn my phone off right before I started. I'll fix that once we get started. Today, I want to welcome Scott Gauvin of Macresco. Hey, Scott.
Hey, Marshall, thanks for having me on again.
So, Scott was with us last month. Scott's a lean practitioner, just like we are, and Scott has really developed a great curriculum and set of thoughts and practices around lean respect for people as part of lean practice. And we started last month. So, Scott, why don't you catch us up on that?
Yeah, so last time I shared a model with you on how we think about where the respect for people aligns with the CI practice. And I'd like to kind of walk through that model again, if I could. When we're in the practice of lean, we're most often starting with the notion to eliminate waste, the muda, or to optimize the process side. As we start to dig deeper, we see that the mora and the unevenness, and we see a lot of unproductive behaviors associated with the mura, or the Murray side, the overburden. And here we often see a lot of examples of stress. We often look at the muda, the mura, and the Murray as disconnected, and sometimes we address them in isolation, but in fact they're all interrelated. The mura, the Murray will often exacerbate the muda, but in our lean practice, we're really so focused on the process optimization that we tend to set aside the mura and the Murray because they're often much more associated with the people elements, and we might have a tendency to push that off to HR. But
Yeah.
as we go a little deeper and we start to understand the sources of the Mura and the Murray, you'll find that there's a variety of unmet needs which we can trace back to some other motivating factors that
Hmm.
are really at the source of the Mura and the Murray, ultimately driving the Muda. And so, in the model last time, I shared with you that there are three of these things that are the what we call the motivating factors. The first one is the SABA, which is our model for understanding the organizational dynamic that looks at the structures, the activities, the behaviors, and attitudes. The SABA.
Yeah.
What we see time and time again is that the structures, how we organize ourselves in the business, the policies or the roles, the responsibilities, and the business model really that drive us to perform activities. And a collection of activities is really a process.
Yeah.
And so we've got the structures that are driving our processes, and and that's really how we design the work to get done. But then those structures and activities drive our individual behaviors, how we actually get the work done, which then drives our attitudes, how we feel about the work,
Right.
the environment, and the people around us that we have to collaborate with in order to get the work done. And often there's a disconnect here that starts a whole cascade of issues and what we
Hmm.
call unmet needs. There's also environmental or situational factors. The pandemic is a great example of a situational issue that creates all kinds of unmet needs. And then we have unique personal needs. At this point, it is well researched, and we have a lot of understanding around the need for autonomy. We all want to have some form of mastery where we feel like we're getting better, improving, or moving ahead. And we want to be associated with a purpose, an organization that has a purpose, that our work really has some kind of significance. And through the pandemic, we've come to realize the importance of being really connected and to have supportive relationships. And anytime we're missing one of these components, our intrinsic motivation will be challenged, creating these unmet needs. And the unmet needs then manifest into stress or unproductive behaviors. And as
Right.
we try to resolve those unmet needs, we ultimately see in our processes as we see the waste that gets created, and that's what we see as the muda.
So
Um,
you know Tony and who's a Beza executive consultant who worked at Toyota for 20 years, and he was asked the question by his sensei, Tony-san, why do American workers not follow standard work? And the answer is it's complex. It's not
yeah,
easy, and it's all over here on the right side of your diagram.
that's right. And so we design the work to get done a certain way, but then we've got these metrics or these expectations, or we've got deviations in maybe the way the product is put together, and so then we start deviating from that in order to get the job done, in order to get the
Right.
work done. and as a result, we deviate sometimes from that standard work. And it's not that people don't want to follow the standard work; it's that the standard work doesn't work.
Right.
We haven't gone back to fix it, right?
Well, and then even if they don't want to follow the standard work for some, cultural reason, which I think is the assumption behind that question, what the reason it was asked that way, um, that would be over on the right side of the diagram. Like it could be
Right,
tied back to some sort of sense of, an atmospheric, personal need, value system, something that, is
right,
leading in that to that. So,
absolutely. Yeah. And so, we tend to focus on the left side, the process side, the process optimization side.
yeah,
But it's what we're trying to introduce here with the respect for people content is that it's really a balancing between the process side and the people side, which is the people optimization side of it. The problem here is that we don't have a roadmap on how to do that, and that side of it is really opaque for us. It's really not
yeah,
clear how to engage. There's no system to follow. Unlike the CI side, we've got a great house of lean. We've got all the tools. We've got a great roadmap. We've got a great process to follow. We don't on the respect for people side. And I think last time I shared this with you as well is that, this is why I often say that most lean is only half lean. The challenge of achieving the promise of lean is the understanding that success really hinges on practicing both of its equally important tenets, continuous improvement and respect for people. The
right,
problem is that there's only a defined rubric or a defined roadmap for the CI side, right? And the
right,
respect for people side is explained simply as respect and teamwork. And those words have become so ubiquitous that
yeah.
there's little clarification or qualification about how these principles
They
impact
don't,
CI or the adoption of lean in general. And because of how common these terms are, we've almost become desensitized to the significance of what they mean.
yeah,
Like a lot of organizations think that they're already doing respect for people because,
sure,
hey, we're nice to people, right?
yeah.
Um, the
That's what we
problem,
titled our May live stream was or we subtitled it your lack of disrespect is not respect for people. There's
exactly,
something
yeah, and,
more.
and exactly. So the problem with pursuing CI without a real understanding of respect for people makes what is already a complex endeavor that is the practice of lean even more difficult to achieve and almost impossible really to sustain. And this is why we struggle with the sustainability of it in many
Right.
cases. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to kind of introduce your rubric if we can get into that and explain that a bit. Is that next?
Yeah. So let
Okay,
me.
good.
So the respect for people rubric. There are three main components. The first one is really to engage with compassion. The second one is to treat people like assets, and the third one is to foster positive disruption. Now there's 9 components to the whole thing, and I think what we're going to dig into today is really the first piece. It's where we start, and it's around the awareness of biases and judgment that we have. And I thought maybe we could do a little exercise here, a little example, if I were to walk people through. Part of the training that we do is in order to help people with this awareness of this bias and of this judgment is, we all have biases. You walk into a restaurant that has a dirty floor, your brain is calculating what that means for you, and it probably is going to say, oh, well, maybe the food isn't so good here, right? That's a judgment or a bias that you have. It could be the best food in the world. They just happen to have a dirty floor.
Yeah.
But our brain is kind of working on overdrive to make sense of the things that don't correlate. You've been told that this is a great restaurant, and you walk in and there's a dirty floor, and your brain is trying to figure that out in fast time. And so it uses these heuristics, biases, and judgments to come to conclusions more quickly. And so the conclusion you might come to is, oh, the food actually isn't going to be that great because they have a dirty floor. And so part of what we've got a challenge here is if we have those biases and we have those judgments and we're making conclusions before we've actually root caused the problem,
Yeah.
we're probably not going to work on the right problem. We're probably going to be working on the wrong problem. And so one of the examples I give is this question: what percentage of people come to work with the intention to do their best? And what do you hear most people say when we ask this question, Marshall?
Uh, 60, 70. I mean, if you're pessimistic, I've heard 30, 40.
Yeah, we'll hear, yeah, as
25.
low as like 20 or 30%.
Yeah.
And it's funny when I do this with a team and I've got 10 people in the room and someone says, "Oh, well, it's probably like 50%." So I turn to them and say, "Okay, who are the 5 people who are not coming to do their best today?" And they all get a chuckle out of that because, everyone wants to think that they're coming to do their best, right?
Yep.
The next thing that I'll do is I ask them to describe the person in this picture. What do you think the most common response is when they see this?
I gotta believe lazy. I mean, first time I saw it, I that's the first thing I thought was lazy, doesn't care about quality, something like that.
Right.
Intellectually lazy, something like that.
Yeah. So more often than not, the most common response I get is lazy. You
Yeah.
might have, oh, government work, or you might have doesn't care,
Yeah.
distracted. You get a lot of different words, but the most common one is lazy. People are just lazy.
Well,
And then I share the story about this line, and the person who did this line came to work that day, and their boss said, "Hey, listen, if you don't get your miles, I'm going to have to let you go. Corporate's putting a lot of pressure on us that we've got to get our miles. If we don't get our miles, then I'm going to have to let you go." And the guy comes back to his boss and says, "Well, hey, don't I do a good job?" "Oh, you do a great job. In fact, I never even have to check on your work because you do such a good job. Your lines are always the straightest. You're the most conscientious. Never have to worry about your work." And he says, "Well, but that the crews that are supposed to go out ahead of me and clear the road, they haven't been doing a really good job. So I've got to stop the rig. I've got to clear the debris. That's how I get my straight lines." He goes, "Yeah, I understand, but corporate's on me about getting these miles. So if you don't get your miles, unfortunately, you're the last one in, so you're the first one out." And he says, "Well, hey, listen, boss, you know what's going on with me personally. His wife was just diagnosed with a terminal illness. He's got 4 kids. 2 of them are chronically ill in the hospital. In fact, many days he goes from the hospital from work to the hospital and then right back to work." And he says, "I can't afford to lose my job." So what we say here is that all behavior is an expression of a need unmet. And what we're
yeah,
seeing is his behavior is in direct response
sure.
to the needs that he's got. Now, is he lazy or is he getting the job done? And
Yeah.
and that's the difference. If we look at this as lazy, well, what do you do with a lazy person? Well, you get rid of them and you get someone who's not lazy. That solves the problem. Here, that wouldn't solve the problem. That's not the root cause of the problem. The problem is that we've got a
Yeah.
bad measurement system. We've got a bad system around the person, not understanding what the real problems are that he's trying to face and not helping him resolve those problems. So our bias here is naturally to say, well, he's lazy. And
Yeah.
if that's the problem statement and that's the problem we're trying to solve, we're
Right.
actually not going to solve the problem. And so what we often see is when we resolve the 8 wastes, we're resolving symptoms of things, but we're
Yeah.
not resolving the right problems. And that's why these 8 wastes come back, a month later, 6 months later, a year later, and we feel like we haven't sustained the gains. It's because we haven't actually addressed the root cause of the problems. And the root cause of those problems are often on the respect for people side of the equation.
Right. So
So,
that's where you can think of this as, foo-foo, touchy-feely. Some of the executives I work with might use those terms. I certainly don't, but I understand that idea. Folks were taught to manage, Drucker-esque type stuff, where in the middle of the last century, behavioralism was the main thought process behind a lot of the development of management practice. Leave your emotions at home, that kind of
mhm.
stuff. And I think uh, any competent leader has to acknowledge that there's stuff that's driving human behavior that's not as simple as the 8 wastes. So I'm I think this is profoundly impactful and important stuff. And what I like about what you've done, Scott, is the rubric where you've kind of broken it down, because I certainly believe that respect for people is a huge part of every lean transformation effort that we ever work with a client on. But I don't know that we've ever been able to break it down as well as you have in the teaching. Our guys are typically steeped in the Toyota way of doing things. So a lot of the stuff that you're getting into, they may actually have an impact on, but they're not able to break it out into a system, which I like about the way you've gone forward. So
Well, and you're
maybe
exactly right. The guys who are the most successful have an instinct around this stuff. They they
that's what
they
it is.
are they tend to come at things compassionately. They tend to inherently treat people as value contributors, and they tend to look at how do we create an environment where we can positively disrupt the status quo? They're doing that naturally. They're doing that inherently. They're doing it instinctually. And so all we're doing is saying, for those of us who don't necessarily have those instincts or don't have the 20 or 30 years of experience to tap into,
Hmm.
what is the roadmap that we can follow that can get us up to speed a little bit faster? And that was kind of the whole point of creating that roadmap.
Yeah.
And when we toiled with it quite a bit around what's the first piece of this, what's the second piece, what's the third piece, and when we came to engage with compassion, I was really concerned that was going to be the frou-frou thing and people were
Yeah.
going to dismiss it right away. The more research I do on it, the more science that I pull on it, the more
Right.
that we actually engage with it, the more that we're realizing that that is so correct. It is so right that you cannot fix problems if you cannot look at the problems in a more compassionate way. And the difference between compassion and just being empathetic. Empathetic is, man, I feel for you. Compassion is, man, I feel for you, and here's how I'm going to help. There's an
Yeah.
action component to the compassion piece. And I'm not, if I think you're lazy, I'm probably not going to be willing to help. And
Right.
so you've got to get over this bias. You've got to get over these judgments to look at the person. It's kind of like, I remember one time we were talking about it and I was like, you got to Ted Lasso people.
Yeah.
Even
I
if,
love that one.
even if you
I'm from
believe
Kansas
that
City, but
people are, yeah, even if you believe that people are coming to work to not do their best, you got to Ted Lasso it. You got to
yeah.
give them the benefit of the doubt. You got to believe in them. You got to approach them as if they are doing their best. And you know what? When you do that, what you'll often find more often than not is that they'll step up to the occasion.
Yeah.
You are giving me the benefit of the doubt. Okay, well, and they'll step up to that. That's been my experience anyway.
Yeah. Mine too. I agree. I'm not sure I'm Ted Lasso, but I certainly would try.
I don't think any of us can be Ted Lasso, but we can at least work towards that.
Yeah. Well, let's put some meat on these bones. I think you've got the rubric that you can fire up for us on the screen here. 1 second.
Yeah. So one of the things that we often talk about is that there's two approaches. There's the care for results, which is what a lot of organizations do, especially if they're only pursuing the continuous improvement side, where you're
Yeah.
focused on, it's really organization benefit focused and profit driven, versus some organizations will be very people focused, culture driven, and we really think that the practice of lean is being lean driven, which is a combination of a balance of the two. And when I say balance, it's a balance of where we put the resources. If we put all of our resources on the CI side or the process improvement side,
Hmm.
and you're not giving any to the culture or people side, then you're out of balance, right? So you've got to balance your resources, and when you balance those resources, that's when you get to the performance focus, the
Well, I
lean.
remember in the old book, The Machine That Changed the World. There was a criticism of lean that it was management by stress, and the response was, well, no, it's management by challenge. So people respond. The culture side of this responds. You get a better culture when you do focus on results, and the result side gives you better results if you have the people focus. So they're
Right.
synergistic, I think, is what you're
Yeah,
showing
and
us
and
there.
that challenge, and there's something to that challenge, right? I mean, you think about anything that you've ever gotten better at, it's always been through walking through that some kind of challenge, right? So you've been, learning how to play an instrument. You
Yeah.
you start, and then there's this period of time where you just toil at it for a while, and then all of a sudden it comes together. And it's no different for the people in organizations. There's this challenge, and what we're trying to do is set up a roadmap on how to create that challenge
Hmm.
that is very considerate of the people as well, so that we can optimize the people in the whole organization. And the more people are challenged, the more they'll grow. The more they grow, the more they'll improve the organization. Because at the end of the day, the performance of an organization really is the result of how people are challenged and grow.
So today is the first of 9 of these we're going to be doing that actually looks at each segment of your rubric or your practice, your practicum. I'm not sure what you call it. I'll go with the rubric since that's the term you use. But um, let's take a look at that. Let's show folks kind of the how to.
Rubric.
Unless I'm
Yeah.
jumping the gun on you here.
No, that's
There we
okay.
go.
So, so the rubric, there's 9 elements. The
Yeah.
first piece of this pie is really the engage with compassion. And in order to be able to learn this skill or to embrace this skill, the first piece is to become aware of your biases and judgments. The next segment we'll probably talk about is how to embrace what we call a learning mindset. And this is really, there's 2 pieces to it. It's um, learning how to ask more challenged questions um, in order to discover, to be more curious. And then the second is how to listen and how to listen to those unmet needs. And then the third piece of this is then how do you put being aware of your biases, asking challenge questions, and listening into a daily practice and actually intentionally doing that on a daily basis. The next piece is then to treat people like assets. And so there's 3 pieces here. First is around clarity and transparency. How do we create more clarity and transparency?
Hmm.
And this happens at all different parts of the organization. There's organizational clarity and transparency. There's leadership clarity and transparency. There's team clarity and transparency. And there's our individual clarity and transparency. The next one is around well-being and development. How do we focus intentionally on the full well-being of people, and how do we create those learning paths for people long term? And then the last piece of this segment is around gratitude and recognition. How do we put the daily practice of gratitude and recognition into our stand-ups, into our meetings, into kind of a daily practice?
Yeah.
And then we move to the third piece of the pie here, which is to foster positive disruption. And this is really where we're trying to now create the environment where we're challenging the status quo. And in order to challenge the status quo, people need to be connected. They need to be trust-based relationships, and so that's the focus on connection. And we've got to normalize trial and error so that making mistakes is not looked at as a detriment; it's looked at as a learning opportunity. So we're going to
Yeah.
experiment through the challenge, and we're going to learn. We're going to fail 3 or 4 or 5 times before we come out with a good solution, but we're going to learn from each of those failures. And then the
Every,
last
yeah.
piece,
I'm sorry, when we talk about hidden factory and how that's bad, what we're really saying is flush problems and bring them to us. And we all
Mhm.
want that. Everybody I've ever talked to loves the idea of getting there. But I think what you're saying is we've got to go in order. You're not going to get to the positive disruption without first, as a leadership team, embracing the
Right.
idea of compassionate leadership. And,
Yeah, I
empathy and
mean,
empathy.
if you just think about it logically, the last piece in that pie is to challenge convention, where you are challenging each other. Well,
Right.
I'm not going to challenge somebody if failure is knocked on the knuckles,
Yeah.
and I'm not going to engage in trial and error if I don't have trust based relationships and know that people have my back when we do fail. And you don't build that trust unless people are recognizing your contributions, and we're developing people with the skills that they need in order to be able to do that. And we're not even going to engage if I'm not clear as to where we're going or why we're doing what we're doing. And all of that happens because we've engaged in compassion to understand the person, to
Yeah.
understand what their needs are. And so yeah, there's a system here that we've designed, and there is a process that you go through. You're not going to allow people to challenge you if you can't have compassion for where they might be
Yeah.
coming from and are willing to listen to them and understand their perspective.
So
So
to do that, you're going to need to become aware of your biases that you're not currently aware of. I thought the diagram or the picture of the stripe on the road was a good one. The restaurant example is a good one. I guess the difference there is, when you're at a restaurant and the floor is dirty, it's your money, you're paying them, so who cares
right.
whether that's a wrong bias, you're just affecting yourself perhaps. But when you're talking about the workplace, this is somebody you hired that you're trying to develop and grow. Hopefully they're going to do a good job. So when you have an unconscious bias that affects in a problematic way, maybe it's part of the root cause of a problem of performance. This awareness of bias and judgment is a really important one. So what does that look like, or what are some examples or exercises that folks, who are in leadership roles can work on to be aware of their own biases and judgments that are unconscious?
Yeah, I mean, just think if you do Gemba walks and you go out, is the voice in the back of your head having a dialogue that says, oh, what's wrong with these people? Why can't they just fill in the blank? Or, oh, that guy again, oh, I should have expected that. these are some of these background conversations that never are verbalized, but they're, if you're having those kind of background conversations in the back of your head, then there's maybe some judgment or some bias that you've got there. And what we're asking for you to do here is to just recognize it. That's it. Just recognize that you've got it. The next piece that we'll get into is what to do about it once you do recognize it. And that's where we get into that learning mindset. And we'll talk about some of the things that we can do to kind of curb that. But the first thing is to just accept that you do have biases and judgments. We all have them. It's part of
Yeah.
part of the neurology of how your brain works. Your brain wants to get to understanding very quickly, and so it uses these heuristics to get there fast.
Right.
But the detriment to that is then your brain doesn't distinguish between fact and fiction. If you're thinking it, then your body responds as if it's actually true.
Yeah.
And is the guy really lazy, or is he just trying to find ways to overcome an obstacle and doesn't have the resources or the tools or the skills or the ability to overcome that obstacle without doing something that you completely disagree with, like painting the line around the branch, right? And
Well,
so
it's
the line in the road is one of those things that we, when we're helping organizations put this into practice, we use the line in the road language
yeah.
where we can challenge each other, where I can say, hey, Marshall, that's an interesting observation. Is that a line in the road? And so it's not just you challenging your own biases and judgments, but allowing us to challenge each other's biases and judgments. And just by saying, hey, is that a line in the road? It allows you to have that interrupter where you can stop and say, is that a line in the road? Yeah, that might be a line in the road. Okay. And then you can move on to the next step, which is to be curious about, why that line in the road even happened in the first place. Is it because they're lazy, or is there a bad system at play?
Yeah. It's almost a 5 whys exercise that you could go through, but you have to catch yourself to do the 5 whys. I like the Toyota example I gave earlier, where our consultant was asked, Tony's son, why do Americans not follow standard work? Because at least it starts with a why. It's an open-minded question. Maybe that person eventually found out the why, but yeah, I know that it's a big one, right? How do we deal with these issues? I think having a systematic approach is going to be really healthy. And so the next week, or it's not going to be next week. I need to get it on the calendar. I don't know that we have an exact date scheduled, but it'll be in July or August, and we'll be talking about.
It's going to be in August because I'm on vacation in July.
Yeah. So good for you. But so in August we'll be looking at the second of 9 pieces of the rubric, where we start getting into what do you do about the unconscious bias. Is that the right way to say it?
That's yep. So the next step in the process is to embrace a learning mindset, and so we're going to kind of open up that dialogue around what does that mean, what does that look like, and what are some of the tools that you can engage in to begin that piece of the puzzle.
Great. Well, once again, thanks, Scott. If anybody has questions, make sure you get in touch with us at bezaperformance.com. Please like and subscribe. Make sure you're invited to the next one. And until August, we'll work on trying to find our own unconscious bias. Thanks, Scott.
All right. Thanks, Marshall. It was a pleasure.
Pleasure here.